Today we're going to kick off a new two-part series on the recently gazetted Cybersecurity Act 2024, and joining me are Johnson, our Head of Technology Practice Group, and Khai Yi, our Co-Head of Technology Practice Group. Gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Pleasure to be here.
So let's dive right in. Johnson, there is this new thing called the Cybersecurity Act 2024.
The hottest law in Malaysia now.
Hottest law in Malaysia right now. So many questions. First of all, so many terms. NCII, NCIS, CSI. Is there a new crime series coming up? I don't know. So maybe from your expert point of view, just give us a brief overview of this new act.
So for this act, you'll be hearing one term that's being thrown around everywhere, every time whenever we talk about this Cybersecurity Act 2024. The term is called NCII. So just for context purposes, NCI it refers to National Critical Information Infrastructure. In layman terms, it's referring to computer or computer systems that is super important in the event that it collapses, is going to collapse or send our country, our society, our economy into chaos. So that is just put that into context so that we all understand what kind of NCI that we are referring to. I think it's safe for us to say that CSA currently is one of the most anticipated law that is actually being introduced in Malaysia right now. So just to give a broad overview, the law is actually being tabled, being introduced in Parliament this March. And then, as everyone has expected, it's actually passed in Parliament this April. And just 2 months ago, June, is actually being gazetted. So right now, everyone is just waiting for the law to be enforced. So just for context purposes, just because a law is being passed doesn't mean that the law will be enforced immediately. Yep. So right now, everyone is just waiting for the law to be enforced. And then based on our understanding, the rumors are the law is likely to be enforced potentially next year, Q1 or Q2.
Thank you, Johnson. That's a great overview. So, Khai, maybe you can elaborate more on the concept of NCII. Is it as critical as it sounds? Because from what Johnson has given,
it's national level kind of criticality, right? Johnson just now already explained briefly what does NCI entails: National Critical Information Infrastructure. The Act, just to go into technicality a little bit. The Act actually defines NCI as computer systems, the disruption or destructions of which would carry detrimental impact on essential services, national security, and also the smooth functioning of our government, right? Mm-hmm. So essentially, NCII is a series of IT systems that essential services, national security, and our government would use to carry out their day-to-day operations. And given how essential services, national security, and governments, right, how their operations would carry are the backbones of our country's economy. Mm-hmm. The impairment or destructions of computer systems used in these three areas would undoubtedly drive down the economy of our country. So the Act is really trying to regulate the protections of these information infrastructure in these critical areas. Yeah. And to delve a little bit deeper into what essentially would constitute essential services, national security, and also government's functioning or government's operations, right? The Act outlines a series of 11 NCII sectors. And I don't remember all the 11 sectors by heart, but essentially the 11 sectors cover government, covers banking and finance, covers transportations, defense, national securities, trade and economy, science and technology, right? You can imagine an airport, for example. What if the air traffic control of an airport, the system that they use, the air traffic control system is compromised? There can be no plane taking off. There'll be difficulty for planes to land. Yeah. And that will cause disruptions, right? Yep. Passengers will be stranded at the airport. Cargos, on the air. On the air as well. Cargos cannot be sent out. So it will have a very disruptive effect on the livelihood of people and also operations of companies that relies on cargos to send out their goods, right? And just to give our audience a little bit more context, to what extent the impact of compromise of national critical information infrastructure would have. Colonial Pipeline hack, one of the most recent and famous hack in US, Colonial Pipeline is one of the largest pipeline that carries gasoline across states in the US. Its computer system was actually compromised a few years ago, which resulted in disruptions in the transportations of gasoline in some states in the US. And that caused some level of public panic, right? You can actually see people lining up at the petrol stations trying to fill up the tank of their cars, because they are worried that whatever supply of gasoline that was going around at that point in time may not be sufficient, right? So suddenly there was a surge of demand of gasoline, and that surge of demand in gasoline drives up the price of gasoline.
Yeah, for
right?
sure.
Yeah. So it actually caused public panic, and really that shows how important NCII is and why we need to ensure a certain level of cybersecurity towards the NCII.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, just to add on, so I think that some of the remarks that we receive, of all the 11 sectors, there are some of the sectors that actually doesn't make sense when you first hear it. For example, like waste management. So imagine, there are just some clients coming to us say that, why is waste management that important?
Yeah.
But after having a deeper thought about that, can you imagine not flushing the washroom for like 1 week?
I don't want to imagine that.
Exactly. So and then another sector is actually agriculture. So imagine for Malaysia, and then for some reasons because of cyber attack, and then there's no rice for Malaysia for the entire month. And then imagine Malaysia, no rice, no nasi lemak,
No chicken rice.
How are we supposed to survive? So this is why the NCII, the 11 sectors, just by looking at it, every single sector, be it for banking, be it for transportation, imagine MRT, LRT line, you are not able to use it. Imagine all the toll system collapse. So there's no way for it to bypass like Puchonto. So each of the sector, the moment it collapses, it will really send Malaysia, our society, into deep chaos.
Yeah, and to add on, of course, agriculture, why is it important is obviously also because our country is one of the top producers of palm oil, right? And that is one of the most valuable commodity of our country. If agriculture, NCII in agriculture sector is actually impacted, it will also affect production of palm oil, processing of palm oil. And waste management, I think, when it comes to treatment of special waste, right, biohazard waste in hospital, for example, you need people to you need certain special equipment to treat all those wastes.
Yep.
So if those things are impaired, it may have a disastrous or catastrophic effect.
This is a very humbling discussion, because when you talk about critical issues, things like poop, things like chicken rice and nasi lemak are considered critical to the nation's security.
Correct. Just by listening to it, it doesn't sound critical at all. Chicken rice is never critical, rice is never critical. But can you imagine surviving without rice? Can you imagine surviving without water? It doesn't sound critical, but the more we put things into context, these are absolutely critical. I can't imagine without water for one whole day. Just imagine there's no water for 1 week. We may not be able to survive. That's why water is actually being named as one of the NCI sector.
Public chaos would ensue.
Yes, definitely.
So, Johnson, how does the Act address designation of NCII Sector Leads and NCII entities as we saw in the Act?
So basically, this law itself, they are being very intentional. And then they actually created a two-tier system. So right now, as mentioned by Khai Yi, there are 11 NCI sectors. So what is going to happen next is that our minister, they will designate NCI lead for each sector. So just think about the sector itself, right now 11 sectors, and then in the near future, they are going to announce, they're going to publish on their website, NACSA website, all the leads for these sectors. So from our understanding, the leads can be a company, or otherwise it can be a government entity. So the words on the street, the rumors are regulators are likely to be appointed as the leads. So just like BNM is likely to be appointed as an NCI lead for banking industry. And then that makes perfect sense. So after having NCI leads, there are a few obligations to be complied by NCI leads. But the most important requirement, or I would say that the first step, that after being appointed as the lead, they are supposed to look into the sector itself to identify which companies, which players they actually own, or they actually in the way that operate or manage NCII. So once I have identified that this company, this bank, this enterprise, if they actually manage, if they own, or if they manage, or if they operate NCI, then they will need to designate them as NCI entity. So it means that within the 11 sectors, they will be lead as a leader, and also there'll be a bunch of companies being named as NCI entities. And then the NCI entities and the leads, they are the one that is being bound by this, the ambit of the CSA that we are discussing now.
Wow, that's a mouthful right there, Johnson.
Yeah.
And it sounds like there's a lot of obligations involved for the leads. So maybe, Khai, what are the key regulatory obligations for NCII sector leads to comply with?
Yeah. The way I see it is NCI leads, they have three broad category of obligations under their CSA. Number one is, of course, the identifications or the designation of NCI entities, right? That's their first official task in a sense. They need to see, okay, within my sector, my NCI sector, who are the companies that owned or that operate NCII? So if I can identify these companies, I need to then designate them as NCI entities. Then they will have to comply with the obligations under the CSA. So that's obligation number one. Obligation number two is, once you have identified all the NCI entities, you then have to come up with a set of rules or a set of minimum standards. In the CSA, this is called the code of practice, right? That each of these NCII entities will have to comply with in order to step up or to ensure or maintain a certain level of cybersecurity readiness. The code of practice will essentially be something that the NCII leads will have to craft, taking into consideration feedback from the industry players, feedback from NCI entities that they have designated. And last but not least, one of the key regulatory obligations of NCII leads is also to administer the act, right? Administers the CSA. CSA imposes a wide ranging of obligations on the part of NCI entities, and NCI leads play a role in administering and ensuring that these obligations are well adhered to. For example, one of the key obligations that NCI entities would have, which we will cover in our next episodes, right, is to notify the NCI leads and also the chief executive of NACSA of a cybersecurity incident, the happening of a cybersecurity incident. And NCI leads will then, of course, have to take all this information in, process the information, discuss with the relevant stakeholders to come up with an action plan, to come up with how to respond, what kind of public announcement to make, in a sense. So yeah, these are the key roles that NCI leads would play under the CSA.
Wow. So, Johnson, maybe you can elaborate more, because we're hearing about NCII leads and we're hearing about NCI entities. Does the Act actually provide or say anything about cybersecurity service providers? Because they are the key to all these things. We can talk about cybersecurity all day long, but those who provide services, what does the Act actually provide for?
Yeah, so the law not only mentions NCI leads, not only mentions NCI entities. So as you rightly pointed out, and the cybersecurity provider, they are playing a very important role. Currently in Malaysia, all cybersecurity provider, they can provide cybersecurity services to all companies without a license. But according to the latest law, in order for them, moving forward, in order for them to provide any form of services, any form of cybersecurity services to company, they would need to obtain a license in order for them to get these services. Just like lawyers, in order for us to provide legal services, we need a license. Just like doctors, they need a license. So right now, the law is also putting them these legal obligations, this requirement for them by saying that if you do not hold a license, you are just not allowed to provide cybersecurity services.
Yep, in Asian families, our parents would tell us, you have to be a professional, right? Be a doctor, an accountant, or a lawyer, because they're all professional bodies, regulated.
Yep.
And now I think parents, you can add, cybersecurity service provider into your list of dream jobs.
Yes, correct.
Yep.
So it's definitely a good career, and then it's a career. It's a job for everyone to take it seriously. The reason is because if any company that is listening to the podcast, it's important for them to know that moving forward, the moment the law is being enforced, if you are actually providing or in any way advertise that you are actually providing cybersecurity services, and yet you do not have a license, you're actually looking at jail terms for 10 years.
Yeah.
Right. So when we talk about licensing, when we talk about regulation, there always has to be kind of like a discipline teacher, like kind of enforcing these things with the rotan, if not, the kids will not fall into line.
Yep.
So is there a regulatory body in place provided for under this act to oversee the enforcement of these laws?
At this moment, we don't have a rotan yet, but Khai and I, we believe that a rotan should be coming soon. Otherwise, what's the point of having rules when there's no discipline teacher going around chasing you to rotan you?
Most likely, the regulators that will be overseeing or rather administering the licensing for cybersecurity service providers, right, will be the National Cybersecurity Agency, most likely. So this is not confirmed yet, but rather we both think that NACSA would be the likely candidate in the sense, or the likely regulators.
So while we're waiting for the guru discipline to be appointed, right, is there any final thoughts or advice or recommendations that you can give to companies who may be looking at being a part of the NCII entity?
So as a general good advice, while we are waiting for the guru discipline to come to class, we first will need to be the good students. And then right now there's a new rule book. And then this rule book, Cybersecurity Act itself, is going to be a very serious rule book. And then we don't think that this is going to be a paper tiger. We think that our government, our country, they are taking this very seriously.
Yep.
They are going to enforce this with an iron fist. So it's very important for all companies to first understand what is this law about, and then speak to your lawyers and then get educated, because the consequences of non-compliance are extremely severe.
Yep.
We are not only talking about just a payment of fine, because in Malaysia, most of the consequences of non-compliance of law, we are only talking about monetary damages. And then companies are rich. They don't mind paying 100K, 200K, 300K. It means nothing to them. But right now, when it comes to Cybersecurity Act, we're actually talking about jail terms. So it means that the director themselves, in the event of breaching the law, they are going to jail. So right now, this is something that is extremely severe, and it's not something that you are able to just resolve with money. It's not something that you are able to resolve just by paying a fine.
Yeah.
So students, remember right now, it's more important to discipline yourself first before the rules are actually enforced. So thank you, Johnson and Khai, for the valuable insights today. To our listeners out there, thank you for listening to part 1 of our series on the Cybersecurity Act 2024. The next episode, in the next part, we're actually going to discuss more about the NCII entities, the obligations under the CSA, and what are the consequences of non-compliance.
Yep.
New episodes of the Legal Insight podcast release every second and fourth Thursday of the month. If you've been listening to the Legal Insight podcast by HHQ, be sure to subscribe on Spotify, on YouTube, Instagram, on LinkedIn, wherever you're watching us. This will enable you to stay updated and stay informed on the latest law and trends.